Welcome to my channel. I'm Ben. Today, we step into a tragic marriage steeped in violence and mystery. The suspicious death of a police officer's wife, found in an unnatural position with a gun beside her, leaving behind details that turn the entire scene into a puzzle. It is the gray edge of morning February 3rd, 2020, when a call cuts through the quiet. A police chief picks up. On the line is Officer Seth Perrault. His voice is flat, stunned. He says his wife has killed herself. Minutes later, the sheriff's cruiser rolls to a modest house near the lake. On the front steps sits a man in shorts and a dark shirt, elbows on knees, face in his hands as if the posture alone could explain everything. The badge on his resume says Law and Order, but behind the door, the room says something else. Inside the primary bedroom, a woman lies flat on her back, legs nearly together, arms tucked tight to her sides. The floor is sober, organized a geometry that doesn't behave like despair. Beside her left foot, a small pistol rests. Near her right side, the magazine ejected. A single round still waits in the chamber. If the shot cycled the slide, why was the magazine removed after? And by whom? The sleeves of her shirt are clean. Her hands are clean. A damp green towel sits abandoned on the closet floor, heavy with the memory of water. One deputy will later say the husband smelled freshly washed shampoo, not smoke. In the waste of a night, empty cinnamon whiskey nips, a scatter of 20, dot the room like spent punctuation. There is another detail, a doorbell camera ping from earlier that night. A deputy rang, announced himself, waited. Footsteps inside. No answer. The subpoena went undelivered. The house silent, as if holding its breath. Now, the same house offers a neat tableau and a simple explanation. A sudden act. A woman who couldn't do it anymore. The sheriff studies the angles, the distances, the quiet. He has worked many scenes. This one refuses to fit. If sorrow pulled the trigger, why does the room look staged? If the end was instantaneous, why is the towel wet? If no one touched her, why do her arms lie pinned like a photograph arranged by careful hands? Suicide or a story built to survive the morning? The next piece of evidence will crack the calm open. Amanda Perrault was 44 years old when her life came to a sudden, violent end. To her sisters Angie and Alicia, she was more than a statistic in a court file. She was the vibrant middle sibling, the one with a quick laugh, sharp wit, and a stubborn streak that had carried her through life's disappointments. They knew her as someone who loved fiercely, who embraced family gatherings and traditions, and who leaned on her creativity as an escape when life at home became harder to endure. But in 2011, when Amanda met Seth Perrault online, her path bent in another direction. He was recently divorced, battling health problems, and unemployed. She saw a man who needed care, and she stepped into that role quickly, moving in with him within 6 months. It was not long before caretaking blurred with control. Seth didn't want her to work. He insisted she use his phone. She had no car, no income of her own. At first, it seemed like dependence built from love, but to her family, it began to look like isolation. Seth's parents helped cover bills. They provided for Seth's daughter from a previous relationship, folding Amanda into a family structure where her role was both nurturer and silent supporter. The sisters noticed Amanda pulling away. Holidays came and went without her presence. She was busy cooking and hosting for his relatives, she said. Slowly, the bright woman they knew seemed dimmer. Her world narrowed to the house near Lake Oconee and the man she had vowed to help. By June 23, 2017, Amanda and Seth quietly married at a courthouse. Angie and Alicia believed the timing was no coincidence. Seth was in the middle of a custody battle for his daughter, and marriage would make Amanda a stabilizing figure in the eyes of the court. To them, Amanda had become not a partner, but a piece of strategy. On the surface, Seth looked the part of respectability. Nice home, nice car, the uniform of a police officer once he was hired by the Eaton Police Department. But the facade concealed chaos. Behind closed doors, alcohol flowed, and arguments erupted. When sober, neighbors recalled they could be affectionate. When drunk, the house echoed with shouting, violence, and Amanda's quiet pleas to keep the peace. By late January 2020, the mask cracked in public. Amanda dialed 911, barricaded in a bedroom, reporting that her husband had put hands on her. She fled to a neighbor's home, frightened, breathless, begging for help. Seth was arrested for family violence. For the first time, Amanda's fear became part of the official record. Yet when she stood in court during his bond hearing, asked if she wanted a protective order, Amanda said no. She allowed him to return home. Her sisters begged her to leave, to pack her things, to demand only a car and her safety. Amanda answered with chilling clarity, "I'm not trying to get killed." 5 days later, she was gone. She was a woman caught between loyalty and survival, love and fear. The system had given her a moment of choice, and she chose to endure, perhaps hoping Seth's anger would pass. Instead, her decision set the stage for tragedy. The day Amanda Perrault died began with an illusion of normalcy. It was February 3rd, 2020. According to her husband Seth, the two had argued in bed, a quarrel not unlike many others. He later told investigators that Amanda looked at him, defeated, and said, "I can't do it anymore." Moments later, he claimed, she produced his Smith & Wesson .380 pistol and executed herself before his eyes. But the picture that met Sheriff Howard Sills and his deputies inside the couple's bedroom did not align with despair. Amanda's body lay supine, her arms stiff at her sides, her legs nearly straight. In suicide cases, Sills knew, bodies often collapse in chaotic ways, slumping, falling at odd angles. Amanda's posture looked arranged, as if someone had carefully placed her there. The gun itself told a stranger story. It was found below Amanda's left foot, while the magazine rested near her right side. Forensics showed there was still a bullet in the chamber. A semi-automatic weapon, when fired, ejects the spent casing and reloads from the magazine. The only way for a bullet to remain in the chamber and the magazine to be ejected is if someone pressed the release button after the shot. The question burned: who removed the magazine? Another inconsistency was Amanda's appearance. Her sleeves bore no blood, no backspatter. Her hands were clean. If she had fired a weapon at close range into her own head, residue should have been visible. Instead, investigators noticed a damp green towel in the closet. One deputy remarked that Seth himself smelled freshly showered. Yet the clothes Seth had been wearing earlier, captured on a liquor store camera with Amanda buying 20 miniature bottles of Fireball whiskey, were found clean and dry inside the washing machine. Neighbors added a chorus of suspicion. They told deputies they often heard violence inside the home, Seth shouting, Amanda crying. On more than one occasion, Amanda confided to a neighbor that if she ever turned up dead, it would be because of Seth. Those words, once brushed off as expressions of fear, now felt like prophecy. The timeline of that morning added another wrinkle. Roughly 20 minutes before Seth reported his wife's death, a deputy had tried to deliver a subpoena at the Perrault home. A doorbell camera captured the visit. The deputy knocked, rang, announced himself. Inside, footsteps thudded. No one came to the door. Sheriff Sills later speculated Amanda was already dead by then, and that Seth stayed silent, scrambling to stage the scene. In Seth's account, Amanda's despair had driven her to end her life out of guilt. He pointed to a handwritten letter found in her nightstand, where she retracted allegations of abuse and apologized for humiliating her husband. To him, the letter was proof of her fragile state. But the penmanship was flawless, suspiciously perfect for a woman in emotional turmoil. To Amanda's sisters, it was obvious she had been coached, pressured to write words that cleared Seth's name. Investigators also noted Seth's behavior immediately after Amanda's death. Instead of dialing 911, he called his police chief directly. He spoke with him for at least 20 minutes before anyone else was alerted. That phone call, unrecorded, remains a blank space in the official record. When Amanda's body was examined, her blood alcohol level was found to be 3 times the legal limit. Seth's defense would later argue that alcohol, marital stress, and shame from her false domestic violence report drove her to suicide. But to Sheriff Sills and Amanda's family, this was an explanation that felt hollow. If Amanda had been so incapacitated, how could she have so neatly staged the final scene of her life? The crime scene yielded small, troubling details. A single speck of Amanda's blood on the back of Seth's pants. A trace of gunpowder residue on his left hand, tested 3 hours after the incident. Amanda's own hands were never swabbed, and the pistol was never fingerprinted. Mistakes that weakened the clarity of the case. Still, to the sheriff, the totality of evidence pointed to manipulation, not despair. On paper, the official cause of death declared by the state medical examiner was suicide, but the room whispered a different story. A staged tragedy meant to hide a murder committed by the man sworn to protect and serve. Amanda had once told her sisters, "I'm not trying to get killed." Days later, her words echoed louder than ever. The investigation into Amanda Perrault's death unfolded like a battle between 2 competing narratives. On paper, the state medical examiner had signed her death certificate as suicide. But for Sheriff Howard Sills and District Attorney Wright Barksdale, the physical evidence, the timeline, and the voices of Amanda's family painted a different picture, one of murder carefully disguised. From the beginning, Sheriff Sills distrusted Seth's story. He pressed him in a recorded interview at the sheriff's office, asking why Amanda's body lay in such an unnatural position, why the gun and magazine were separated, why the towel was wet. Seth's answers wavered. At first, he denied touching her body. Later, he admitted he might have hugged her, probably like, "Honey, what the hell's going on?" An explanation that raised more suspicion than it settled. Investigators dug into Amanda's recent past. They unearthed her 911 call just days before her death, when she barricaded herself in a bedroom and begged dispatchers for help. They listened to her sister's text chains urging her to leave, and her chilling reply, "I'm not trying to get killed." They spoke with neighbors who confirmed years of fights, crashes of furniture, Amanda crying out in fear, and Seth's aggression. One neighbor even recalled Amanda saying explicitly that if she turned up dead, Seth was responsible. Physical evidence stacked up, if imperfectly. Surveillance footage from a drive-through liquor store placed Amanda and Seth together on the morning of her death, buying 20 miniature bottles of whiskey. Seth wore a Pink Floyd shirt and black pants in that footage. Hours later, when deputies arrived at the house, he had changed clothes. The original clothing was found in the washing machine, dry, as if placed there deliberately. Trace forensics gave prosecutors additional footholds. A tiny speck of Amanda's blood was found on Seth's pants. Gunshot residue appeared on his left hand, though it was discovered hours later at the sheriff's office and could be challenged as contamination. Crucially, Amanda's hands were never tested, and the gun was never dusted for fingerprints errors that defense attorneys would later wield. Still, Sheriff Sills built his case. He noted Seth's odd choice to call his police chief instead of 911, spending 20 minutes on the phone before emergency responders were even alerted. He pointed to the handwritten retraction letter found in Amanda's nightstand, which seemed too precise, too perfect, as though dictated. And he emphasized the witness testimony of neighbors and family who believed Amanda would never take her own life. 7 months after Amanda's death, the medical examiner's ruling of suicide nearly torpedoed the case. Seth's defense attorney, Justin Kenney, declared it open and shut, proof that the state could not demonstrate murder beyond a reasonable doubt, but Sheriff Sills and DA Barksdale refused to abandon the case. They convened a grand jury in November 2020. Despite the examiner's conclusion, jurors reviewed crime scene photos, videos, and testimony. After deliberation, they indicted Seth Perrault on charges of malice murder, felony murder, and aggravated assault. For Amanda's sisters, it was the first breath of justice after months of agony. Seth, once a sworn officer of the law, was now an accused murderer, jailed without bond, awaiting trial. But the road ahead was uncertain. The prosecution faced the challenge of disproving a medical examiner, dismantling the defense's suicide theory, and convincing a jury that behind the badge, behind the mask of respectability, lived a man capable of staging his wife's death. The question was no longer whether Amanda Perrault was gone. It was whether the system could prove who had truly pulled the trigger. The trial of Seth Perrault began in February of 2022, 2 years after Amanda's death. By then, the story had already divided a community. Was Amanda a despondent woman who ended her own life, or a victim of a violent husband who manipulated the scene? The courtroom in Georgia filled with reporters, family, and law enforcement officers, many of whom once worked alongside Seth. From the outset, the prosecution set a simple frame. Amanda Perrault did not kill herself. District Attorney Wright Barksdale stood before the jury, showing them photographs of Amanda's body lying on the floor, the gun oddly positioned, the magazine ejected. He reminded them of the damp towel, the shower smell on Seth, the cleaned clothing. He replayed Amanda's 911 call, where she barricaded herself, her terrified voice breaking through the speakers. And he introduced neighbors who had heard years of violence, who had seen bruises, and who remembered Amanda's chilling words. "If I die, Seth did it." Perhaps the most powerful testimony came from Amanda's cell phone. Jurors watched a video she had secretly recorded months before her death. In it, Seth argued with her, his voice raised, his temper exposed. Amanda's face appeared frightened as she said he had choked her. The jury also saw photographs of her injuries, black eyes, split lips accompanied by text messages she sent to her sisters, describing nights of terror. These digital records gave Amanda a voice inside the courtroom. The defense, led by attorney Justin Kenney, countered with a different story. He held up the medical examiner's official report, declaring Amanda's death a suicide. He told jurors that Seth loved his wife deeply, that she was struggling with alcohol, and that her blood alcohol level was 3 times the legal limit the night she died. He suggested that Amanda felt overwhelming shame for her 911 call and feared she had ruined Seth's career and custody battle. According to the defense, Amanda wrote the retraction letter of her own accord and ended her life in despair. Experts clashed. The prosecution highlighted ballistics inconsistencies. The gun's magazine could only have been ejected after firing if someone pressed the release button. The defense countered with their own expert, who demonstrated that, on rare occasions, the magazine might drop out spontaneously when fired. Forensic scientists testified about the tiny speck of blood on Seth's pants and the gunpowder residue on his hand, while the defense emphasized contamination and the failure to test Amanda's hands. Another controversial witness was a jailhouse informant who claimed Seth confessed while awaiting trial. The defense attacked his credibility, pointing to his criminal record and incentive to fabricate. Still, his testimony painted Seth as a man worried about surveillance cameras and his clothes being seen in evidence. After a week of testimony, both sides made their closing arguments. The prosecution insisted this was no accident, no suicide. It was domestic violence escalating to its inevitable end. The defense urged the jury not to convict a man when the state's own medical examiner had called it suicide. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. When they returned, the courtroom held its breath. The foreperson stood, and delivered the verdict, guilty of murder. Seth Perrault, once an Eton police officer, was sentenced that same day to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Amanda's sisters wept, clutching each other, whispering that justice had finally been served, even if it could never bring her back. The badge that once protected Seth now became the emblem of betrayal, and the courtroom echoed with a truth Amanda's family had known from the beginning. She had not chosen death. Death had been chosen for her. Understanding the psychology of Seth Perrault requires peeling away the dual layers of authority and intimacy. To the outside world, he was a uniformed officer, a symbol of protection and order. But inside his home, he embodied control, volatility, and fear. Experts in domestic abuse often describe this duality. Abusers who maintain a polished exterior while exerting relentless domination behind closed doors. Seth's relationship with Amanda followed a pattern common in coercive control. At first, he offered affection and attention, presenting himself as a man in need of care. Amanda, compassionate by nature, responded to that need. Over time, however, care became captivity. By taking her independence, her phone, her car, her ability to work, Seth ensured Amanda's world revolved around him. Psychologists recognize this as a calculated strategy, shrinking a partner's autonomy until leaving feels impossible. The abuse escalated in cycles. When sober, Seth could be gentle, even doting. But under the influence of alcohol and pain medication, he became angry, manipulative, and violent. This cycle of charm and cruelty kept Amanda trapped, hoping each period of calm would last, terrified each eruption would end worse than the last. Her sisters noticed the telltale signs: fewer family visits, strained phone calls, a brightness dimming from her personality. These are classic indicators of isolation and psychological control. The retraction letter found in Amanda's nightstand provides chilling insight into this control. Its flawless penmanship and exonerating tone suggest coaching. To forensic psychologists, coerced writings often reveal the abuser's fingerprints not literally, but through language that protects the perpetrator more than the victim. Amanda may have written it, but the words were not her own. Seth's need for control extended beyond the relationship into his identity as a police officer. Colleagues remembered him invoking his badge repeatedly, telling Sheriff Sills, "I'm a good officer." That refrain suggests a fragile ego dependent on authority and reputation. For someone like Seth, Amanda's 911 call threatened not just his marriage, but his very sense of self, his career, his custody of his daughter, his standing in the community. In psychological terms, this is a narcissistic injury, a blow to identity so severe it can trigger extreme retaliation. Amanda's statement to her sisters, "I'm not trying to get killed," shows she understood the danger. Victims of intimate partner violence often develop a heightened intuition for risk, a survival instinct honed by years of abuse. Tragically, Amanda recognized the threat but felt powerless to escape it. From a legal psychology perspective, the case also reveals how systemic failures compound abuse. Amanda called for help. She reported violence. Yet when asked if she wanted a protective order, she declined, likely out of fear of Seth's retaliation. Courts often underestimate this fear, treating it as consent rather than coercion. Amanda's decision to let Seth come home was not free choice, but survival calculus. Ultimately, Seth's psychology can be viewed through three lenses: the abuser who isolates and manipulates, the officer who hides behind authority, and the man whose fear of losing control turned lethal. Amanda's death was not the act of a woman in despair. It was the culmination of years of psychological domination and the violent assertion of control by a man who could not accept humiliation or loss. Behind every statistic of domestic homicide lies this dynamic: love twisted into control, care into captivity, and the desperate fear of leaving into the final silence of death. When the verdict was read guilty of murder, Amanda's sisters held each other and wept. Relief mingled with grief. Justice, in a courtroom sense, had been served. But no sentence could return the sister they adored, the woman whose laughter once filled holiday gatherings. For them, the verdict was a bittersweet victory. Accountability at last, but absence forever. Seth Perrault was sentenced to life in prison, without the possibility of parole. For a man who had once worn a badge and patrolled the streets of Eaton, Georgia, the fall was staggering. The same uniform that symbolized authority now became a reminder of betrayal. Former colleagues struggled to reconcile the officer they knew with the man convicted of murdering his wife. Amanda's family vowed her story would not fade. On each of her birthdays, her sisters released purple balloons into the sky, tied with handwritten notes of love. In 2022, those notes also carried the number for the National Domestic Abuse Hotline, a gesture meant to reach others trapped in silence. Their message was clear. If you see abuse, speak up. Do not assume the victim can always save themselves. The case also sparked broader reflection on systemic failures. Advocates pointed out how Amanda's 911 call, her plea for protection, had not been enough. When she stood in court days before her death and declined a protective order, the system interpreted it as choice. But those who understood the psychology of abuse recognized it as fear, coercion, survival instinct. For many, Amanda's tragedy underscored the need for stronger interventions, even when victims hesitate. In the community of Eatonton, whispers of the case lingered. Neighbors remembered the arguments that rattled across the quiet neighborhood and wondered if they should have done more, if they should have called authorities sooner. The shame of silence weighed heavily, a lesson carved into collective memory. Nationally, Amanda's story joined the tragic statistics of women killed by intimate partners. But it was also more than a number. Her voice lived on through recordings, texts, and the testimony of those who loved her. She became a symbol of resilience too late, and a reminder that behind every case file is a life cut short by control disguised as love. Amanda once told her sisters she was afraid of being killed. In the end, her words became haunting prophecy. Yet through the verdict, through the public reckoning, through the balloons released each year into the sky, her memory resists silence. Justice did not bring her back, but it carved her story into history. And for those who knew her, Amanda remains not only a victim of violence, but a call to action for awareness, for intervention, for courage in the face of fear. The story of Amanda Perrault's death leaves us with a painful lesson. Domestic abuse isn't always visible, and sometimes the very people who wear the badge, sworn to uphold the law, can be the ones inflicting terror behind closed doors. Amanda dialed 911. She asked for help, but in the end, she still couldn't escape her tragedy. It reminds us that silence or hesitation can cost a life, and that neighbors, friends, family, and community all share the responsibility to notice, to listen, and to act when something feels wrong. In the United States, every year, hundreds of women are killed by an intimate partner. These are not just numbers. They are real lives, real stories like Amanda's. Remembering her should push us to take action, to never turn away when someone shows signs of fear. So, what do you think about this case? Do you believe the legal system did enough to protect Amanda? Or did it fail her at the most critical moment? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If this story struck you, please hit the like button and subscribe to my channel. Together, we can continue uncovering true crime cases that challenge us, shock us, and remind us why justice and awareness matter.